sacrifices that Americans make, in part because of our war with Japan, is going to be our civil rights. FDR orders that any place in America could be declared a military zone if we might see invasion. As a result, if you look at a map, most of western of America is going to be marked for invasion. Let's not forget the Japanese are there in the west, and even eastern America could be marked for invasion from German. So what does that mean? As a result, when we mark an area down as a military zone, Americans are going to force Japanese Americans or Americans of Japanese descent into internment camps. That's a nice way of saying a concentration camp. It's really the same thing. It's just a gigantic camp that essentially is there to house people of Japanese descent. You can see pictures of it down here, and they look just like those camps that you would see, in Germany, rows upon rows of military barracks where you just stuff people in. Some of the reports showed that these barracks would be made for 4 to 10 people. Instead, you've got 25 people crammed inside them. I mean, it was not a pretty situation by any means. These 10 different internment camps built across the nation are there because we fear. We fear, right, that Japanese Americans might be spies. Of course, we didn't lock up nearly as many German Americans, I guess probably because it's harder to figure out who's German American, who isn't, right? Because German Americans are of white ancestry, right? Where even if your last name is Smith, if you look Japanese, we can probably figure out you are, as opposed to your last name being Smith and being of German descent. And not quite sure about that unless you go around wearing lederhosen, right? So we see 110,000 American citizens deported to these internment camps. Here's a quote: "Climbing into a truck, we drive through buildings and bustling Chinatown. In a few minutes, we're there in the corner of 8th and Lane, usually deserted, but filled up now with silently labeled Japanese standing there just waiting with their suitcases and their sea bags." And this was a mess of a situation, folks. It really was, because what happens here to your life, right, when you receive, this order of evacuation. And that's what this image is here that I just put up, right? It tells you exactly what you have to do. Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry living in these areas. Here's where you have to go, when you have to go there, what's going to happen to you, and we're going to bus you off to one of these internment camps. And just think about it logically, right? So then what about my house? What about my job? What about my business? Well, as soon as the day after Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans were posting big banners like this one. This is actually a photograph from Dorothea Lange on their stores that say, "I am an American. I'm not Japanese. I'm not a spy. I'm not a bad person." But the reality is, you can't hold on to this business when you are in an internment camp. So when you first saw that sign go up that said, "It's time to relocate," you had to figure out what to do with your business. You had weeks to sell everything inside your business, just weeks, and even to sell the business itself. That's incredible, because really, there's no way you're going to get what you're owed when you're closing out for an evacuation sale, because everything has to go, including the business. Now think about that on the flip side. When you get out of the internment camp in 1945, you don't have your business anymore. You don't have an inventory. You don't have a place to put it. And you probably didn't get enough money when you left to open up a new one when you get out, because you had to sell everything at a discount. It's a remarkably difficult situation to put people in when they go to these concentration camps, which are located in the middle of nowhere, by the way. Like this one here, for example, located out in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. No shelter, and it's freezing cold. When the winter came, there weren't even blankets. Good job, America. These conditions were not great. I mean, it's by nowhere concentration camps that you're going to see Stalin use or Hitler use, but this isn't exactly hotel living, folks. And these people are American citizens. They didn't do anything wrong. In fact, we didn't find anyone of Japanese descent, really, at all, that we could say was a spy. Not really. Not many at all that you could kind of chalk up there. Kind of reminds you of Americans' paranoia about Muslims, doesn't it, in the present day and age? Interesting. Japanese Americans, as you might think, wouldn't take this sitting down. They actually sue. And here's the interesting thing. The Supreme Court says in the lawsuit that was brought by Japanese civilians called Korematsu versus the United States, in the Supreme Court, when it goes there, it says, you know what? The government can suspend your rights. It's questionable if it does it on race, but it can if it needs to. Now, obviously, we realize that this is not a good situation, so it takes us only 40-something years for our president to apologize and to give $20,000 to each Japanese American survivor. So we'll talk more about this, as you might imagine, when we get into class, and we'll see you then.